welcome back to the Switchboard Artist Interview series. I'm Director Sarah Lavasco, and I'm sitting here with our April Artist in Resident. Are we all good? Cool, awesome. Carlos Arturo Gonzalez Barrios, and we are here also with Andrew Ryan. He was our former Artist in Resident last month. He's helping us tonight. He's on the cameras, and he'll be also assisting with any questions. Thank you so much, Andrew, for being here and helping out. We're getting better and better at this, so thanks for hanging in. All right, so again, if anyone has any questions or wants to ask Arturo anything throughout our conversation tonight, go ahead and type it into any chat, and we'll hold till the end for questions, which will be around 7:30. We are currently in our downtown location, which has been transformed into Arturo's full-time working studio until the end of next week, so about 2 weeks of him full-time here. This residency marks the first time an artist from out of town is staying here in Haverhill. And if anyone has spoke to me over the past year, they've known that this has been sort of a dream of mine to sort of see this to fruition, so thank you for being the first one. It's really exciting. And Arturo is based out of Lynn, Massachusetts, and I just can't thank you enough for generously bringing your time and your art practice to Haverhill for this dedicated studio time, so thank you.
No, quite on the contrary, thank you.
Absolutely, sure. So I'm so grateful for our community it feels like it's growing and growing with our cameras as well to get to know Arturo and your work. So let's just go ahead and jump in and get started. So, can you tell me about first memory you have of sort of that you can recall of making art, or that even looking back, if you didn't realize it at the time, that was something you can harken back to?
As a lot of kids do, I always drew. I just never stopped. But I think for me, kind of the moment where certain things kind of clicked was I was a huge fan of Garfield, of Garfield cartoons. And I remember I must have been 4 years old or 5, and I asked my mom, I was like, Mom, so is Garfield real? Is Garfield a real living cartoon thing? And if so, where does he live? And my mom was like, he's not real, he's a cartoon character, and the way that cartoons are made is it's a bunch of drawings, you put them together, and they move. And I was like, oh my God, that's what I want to do.
That's great.
And I thought that that while I was gone at school, there were a bunch of people drawing Garfield. So when I, made it in time back from school, I'd be able to watch, the show. So I was like, oh yeah, I want to do that. And I remember I stapled a bunch of sheets of paper together and made a huge roll.
Great.
and I drew my first short film, I guess you would call it. I don't have it. It got thrown out, but
that was my as a follow-up question. But that's interesting that your first art experience, I didn't expect this, was in fact related to animation. I didn't know in fact that long. So yeah. That's great. Thank you for sharing that. Have you reminded your mom about that in the recent future, or in the recent
I don't think so.
Or time?
No.
It's a funny memory. Cool, thank you for sharing that. So after that experience, when quite young, did you realize there's at times this moment for creative people who you might realize that you like drawing, or you enjoy being creative, or drawing cartoons or whatnot. When did you was there a time or a moment that you can recall that you realized this was something that you wanted to do, or something you wanted to do full time, and not even in the sense of a job, but that you realized, I'm an artist, I'm going to be a maker?
Yeah, so I grew up in a family of engineers. So there wasn't, and I was always encouraged to do art. Like it was never like a thing that was like, I mean, of course, it's like you're gonna starve to death, but it was like, my parents always supported me. But I don't know, I thought I was gonna also be an engineer, because that's what my mom's an engineer, my dad's an engineer, my grandfather was an engineer. So I thought I was gonna do that. And as a child, I was really into science, and I really like to imagine inventions and space travel and things like that. And over time, I think I realized that I liked drawing and dreaming about those things more than the math behind it.
Sure, yeah.
But it wasn't until after high school, because I don't know, I just kind of like thought I was gonna study electronic engineering, because I wanted to work in television, because my grandfather was a television engineer, broadcasting at the local TV station, and I thought I wanted to do the same thing. I don't know, I just didn't think that I could like make a living out of like creative work.
Sure.
And I enrolled at the pre-college program at SMFA, because I was like, if I'm gonna go and do engineering, I want to get the art bug out of me first. Like I want to have like the full, artist experience, and if I'm satisfied with it, I'll leave it, and then I'll just come back to Mexico and study.
That was so insightful of you as like a young person to have that foresight to say, I mean, well, so after that time at the pre-college, I mean,
yeah, and I went
history, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and I went to pre-college, and I was like, this is what I want to do.
That's amazing. Great. So you were, I mean, it seems like you had more of a clear head about that, as far as, deciding to go to like, pre-college or college level studies for art.
Yeah, well, I didn't consider really studying art in college. I don't know, it didn't cross my mind. I thought like art is something that I can learn on my own.
Sure, yeah.
And I just thought like I'll just get it out of myself, but I just couldn't leave it.
Here you are. So that's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Oh, great. Right. So just back up a little bit. You're from Tampico.
Yes.
This is a port city on the Gulf of Mexico. It's in the state of Tamaulipas. Because we only have 30 minutes this evening,
yes.
I've had the benefit of getting to know you and learning a little bit more about that city and that part of the world. Is there anything that you'd like us to know tonight for our purposes of talking about some of your past work and what you're doing at the Switchboard? Anything that you'd like us to know about Tampico?
I'm actually wearing the shirt from the Tampico Madero.
Awesome. Perfect.
Go Blue Crabs.
I'm so glad.
There is something very interesting about Tampico. Tampico was destroyed and built 5 times, which I think is very interesting. And it was done in different locations. So there's the ancient Tenec settlement that existed. Then it wasn't really conquered by the Spanish until way later, so it's not really a colonial town, because the Huastecs were very fierce warriors, and they killed all of the friars that tried to settle there. But it wasn't until the pirates came that the Spanish and the natives got together to fight against the pirates, and then they settled. But then that town was destroyed by a pirate attack. So there's this history of the city kind of being, and it is kind of like a place that's coveted because it is in a place where you could say it's kind of like strategic.
Yeah.
Like if
Yeah.
it's on the Gulf Coast of Mexico. It's very similar to how Veracruz is kind of like a weak spot in Mexico, because
Yeah.
like all of the invasions that happen to Mexico are on Veracruz.
Mm-hmm.
So I like to think that like Tampico's history is kind of like this history of greed, like who gets to kind of like control that that place. So there's all of these kind of like risings and coming downs, and it's all because of this kind of like greed of who gets to control the land. And
Sure.
yeah.
It's very strategically placed.
Mm-hmm.
The history of the oil industry that's been there, that again, we kind of talked about this a little bit today, that who and why is there and for what reason, and what does that do to contemporary Mexicans? Like what now? And so that's great. I think that's the sort of like, history of being taken over for 5 times, sort of like there's so much history in that, and I think that has much to do with, I think, my next question, which is about, I've kind of come to know your keen appreciation for history, not just history, but sort of needing to understand the full story. And I think that's, as artists, that's sort of what, we just can't help it. That's our story. We try and tell people stories that perhaps was only told objectively. You said that the development of identity, an individual or collective, requires subjective processes of self-reflection. I guess, what drives you to sort of keep digging for that other story? To sort of take that from there.
I think a very formative experience for me was growing up during the drug war in Tampico, and it was kind of something that wasn't covered in the news, either the newspaper or the television. And I don't think it was out of malice, but I think like everyone was just scared if you talked about certain things. I mean, even in casual conversation, there are certain things that you have to lower your voice because you don't know who's listening. So yeah, there was a lot of kind of like confusion and misinformation during that time, where people would go missing. You'd hear explosions or weird noises, and nobody would tell you what that was. And I think something that I realized was that the experience of people talking about it was like there was like a disconnection between the official version and the way that people experience things. And I think it also goes alongside what art is. I think I didn't when we look at a photograph, or in the ways in which people used to like register history, making illustrations and things like that, I think there's like a strive towards objectivity, which is like how did things looked, right? But I think it doesn't really tell us like how did it feel to be there. And I think that's often escapes. I don't think we can get a full picture without like putting ourselves in that situation.
Sure. I think that also, so I want to also bring up, is there a video game that you started creating about six years ago now, that I happened upon? I was sort of researching your work months ago and looking into what you've been working on. It's called Depresión Tropical Tampico, and it's pixelated, designed to be very pixelated. Sort of, for me, it reminds me of the old, like Donkey Kong or old like just those pixelated early video games. And everything is so flat, and there's this like very strong facades, and it just reminded me of sort of what you were just talking about, of sort of when you were an early teenager, that like that feeling of there's these facades, like I don't know if I'm getting the whole story, like what is happening now, and everything is just turned upside down in a way that I have never experienced, but that I was so intrigued to see that you were talking about these things and using architecture from the city, that like researching these beautiful buildings that and putting them and drawing them into this game. do you want to talk about that just a little bit, about that project? I know that it's kind of come in and out, but yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of like a longer project that I think it still has some years.
Yeah.
So I also don't know how to program. But yeah, after I came to the States, I don't think I consciously like started thinking about it. It's just like something that started coming out of me. It was just like my work just kind of like started kind of like reflecting these things that I started seeing. I think one of my first instincts was to kind of like, whenever I saw a picture on Facebook that someone, like a neighbor, had posted or something, I would collect that and do something with it. Like I have a print of like a bus that's like on fire, and that was like from a time when the government captured a drug lord, and then the cartel in retaliation, they kidnapped a bus and they like burned it to like close a street, so that the military couldn't get to the airport. And that was actually in my neighborhood. It was like between my house and my best friend's house, and I used to like walk there all the time. And that picture just kind of like stuck with me, and I remember telling my sister, like, I was like, that is history. And my sister was like, why is that history? That's like something that, it's unfortunate, but I don't want to remember that. And I was like, we need to remember those things. So the video game is about that sort of feeling about this city that you come into it as an outsider, but once you get there, you get this very cheery, very front-like kind of atmosphere. But then once you start kind of like advancing into the story, the space itself, I wanted to give you that feeling of like being kidnapped in your own city. So yeah, and the title, the name of the game, it alludes to to hurricanes, because Tampico is in a place where it's like hit by hurricanes every 50 years or so, and it just I don't know. It gives me this sense of this like cyclical building and destruction and rebuilding, but also how it can be like a metaphor for this kind of like social things that like bubble and destroy. I mean, my city's population has been like stagnated at like 300,000 for like 10 years.
Wow.
So it's like it has like it hasn't increased. So it's interesting to me, like the social contract and like the idea of a city. When is it worth being part of that, or where like you're just kind of like, I'm out of here. This isn't.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think everyone can understand that to a certain extent about one's home. But it's not to the extent that the violence that you witnessed and those things that were just so close to your home, and that feeling of unsafety. That said, I think there is something that, again, as this thread that all of us can understand, and to a certain extent, about your home and about like place and the cyclical nature of like what happens to cities. And we're sitting in a place that has its own history of 15, 20 years ago. If you said to someone, I'm going to Haverhill to do an artist residency, they would have been like, no, you should just probably not, like, don't. And so what is that? Like, where did that come from? So
that's what they told me about Lynn. When I moved to Lynn, they were like, oh, Lynn, city of sin.
Yes, sure. And we're sitting here with Andrew from Heaventown, Haverhill, because oftentimes this place is referred to as Helltown, and there's a lot of unique, that's part of our history. And I think that learning about it, talking to people who've been here, who've experienced what Haverhill was, can, and is what it can be. And so I'm really, I feel very lucky to have your perspective here in the city. And again, to be like sort of an outsider, just coming from Lynn, but also with your background and, you know, where you're from, and to have that lens to work here in the city. That's also right now going through, we're sort of on this other end of this, I'm not really sure. A lot of questions these days and amongst the arts community about behavioral and prices and all that stuff. But I guess I'll reserve that for another conversation. But I think we should bring it back to sort of what you're working on now. We've been talking about very concrete, very non-abstract subject matter that, you know, we had discussed previous to your residency that perhaps looking into the story of Hannah Dustin and like talking about, you know, that maybe we unearth that history, we sort of like bring that to the fore, but then we sort of quickly realize that that's going to take a few years. You know, that's going to be a different level of reflection. So you pivoted, and I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about what you're working on and what you sort of decided on, and the abstracted nature of what you've been doing here.
Yeah, so I often kind of like used to think of like my art practice kind of like divided into two kind of like very different camps. One of it is my conceptual artwork that is like very focused on, you know, historical, political, social situations, and that's my fine arts. And then there's my animation, which is just what I like doing, and I don't really like. I struggled for a long time, kind of like marrying those two things, because animation is something that's difficult to master. But I also think that there are so many rules that are ingrained in how we think about animation, that it has to be about character, it has to be about acting, and I think it wasn't until recently that I kind of like started like deconstructing or like thinking about my animation in a more kind of like conceptual way. So what I'm working on for the residency is actually, I may be getting ahead of your question.
Oh no, that's okay. It's okay.
Yeah, but it was born out of a project that I was working on with my students.
Great.
Which was, we're doing a lot of like looking at windows, like looking outside. I don't know if this is gonna go in that direction, but so we're looking at outside the windows like a lot. So I've been working with materials a lot, like experimental with materials a lot since I became a teacher, and I thought about like the in animation. In the old days, they used to, you get your drawing and then that gets traced onto a transparency sheet. So that way you can change the background, not have to draw it every time. So I thought like, okay, why don't we use the cells to kind of like use whatever's behind the window as our background. In that sense, it's kind of like we're projecting what's on our mind outside, which is what we're doing. We're like projecting our thoughts into like what's gonna happen tomorrow, like what's out there. So my students and I made these animations about like what are you projecting, what are you hoping to project once we all emerge from this period of incubation. So from there, I kept thinking about that idea, and you know, with my students, it's good at that level. But I was thinking about like I'm a very pessimistic person by nature. I think pessimism is one of the driving force, one of my driving forces in life. So I thought like, yeah, maybe I like to revisit this, but like at that level of thinking about like not just like, oh, what is my hope, you know, like coming out of this, but also like thinking about like this wave that we're riding of hope and despair, and how we're kind of like up and down, and also the plasticity of animation, which is like I was actually the other day, I was looking at, somebody made these like sculptures out of Tom and Jerry still frames.
Yeah.
And I was realizing, like, I was like, wow, like, the way that they sculpted these drawings that are crazy drawings, they're like very distorted, like, you know, how cartoons are. I was like, that must have taken a lot of work to like sculpt that, but like in drawing, you can just like sketch that, you can do it, and it looks three-dimensional, right? So animation allows you this kind of like immediate sculpting material. That you can do, and even if it's a flat sheet of paper, you can do things that have volume, you can, and they can transform immediately, right? So
we can see that. I mean, you can see that in like the clips that we've been sharing. Yeah, it's amazing. That's. Do you consider that? Is that what experimental animation is considered? You know, when like the work that you very much identify as an experimental animator.
Yeah.
You know that. Right.
I would say I struggle with the experimental animation category. I love experimental animation, but I am a very classically trained drawer.
Sure. Yeah. Yes. I mean, there's many examples of it that we've been trying to share, and that people can see over the next week for sure. Yeah.
So I'm just beginning to kind of like scratch the surface of experimental animation.
Yeah.
And even then, I would say my animation is not the most experimental you can get. Like it's still very classical drawing. If you look at the movement, it's very smooth because I'm applying principles of animation. There are certain decisions that I take when I'm drawing in order to kind of like, even if the drawings morph or move very differently, there's still kind of like a guiding unity in time that makes them all work together.
Yep.
But there are like many different forms of experimental animation that, like, I don't know, there's this animator called Caleb Wood who he made this animation by photographing bird poop.
That's great.
I just compiled them and just like figure out which ones kind of like looked alike, and it animates. So yeah, I'm not the most experimental.
That's one end of the sure.
Yeah. I'm very classical as experimental animation is concerned.
Sure. We're talking about like that kind of
But I'd like to get that kind of brilliance to just kind of like recognize, like, oh my God, bird poop.
I can make this into an animation.
Yeah.
I think, well, I like to hear that sort of, you're a teacher, you teach at Raw Artworks, and you had a hand in, or in fact were the one to develop their animation program, sort of bridging the visual arts programming that the students got with film and in between. So I think, I just wanted to sort of like recognize that and the work you've been doing there, which is fantastic. And it sounds like, I mean, that was sort of my follow-up question to that, was that how does that influence your daily work? And I know that, we probably have many teachers watching and listening right now. Many who have been residents here also teach during the day and in some format or another. So it'll be really interesting to see sort of what you bring from this experience and from you full time in here, for like 2 weeks straight, what you'll bring back to the students as well. So I think Andrew, would you mind giving a time check just so we're 7:30. That's pretty good timing, Arturo.
Yeah.
Let me just say, you and I could just ask you so many questions. But between what you bring to the switchboard, from where you're from, as well as sort of my lack of experience with working with animators. Just today, actually, we had a local artist pop in and identify herself as, hey, I didn't know any other, artists who are working with this medium locally. So that was really exciting for me to witness that and know that, just you being here is important to this community. And I hope that those little different sparks of interaction and connection continue to happen throughout your time here. Let me just make sure I'm not forgetting anything. I'd love to see if we had any questions. I know Andrew's kind of looking around to see if there's anything that anyone wants to.
No questions on this camera.
To address, or thank you everyone for tuning in and for being here. Andrew, I think we're all, no questions at the moment. People can absolutely follow up. We've got Arturo's Instagram feed. You can Recedebo?
Yeah.
Recedebo. R-E-C. Can you spell it? I can say it, but I know you can follow it on the switchboard and people can find you. But
Yeah, just it's Recedebo.
awesome.
Yeah.
Because it's not, yeah, so Recedebo.
Is the Spanish word for obey but backwards. Excellent. It's like some dumb.
You know, I didn't know that. I keep meaning to ask you, so I'm glad that we talked about that. Great. So yes, follow Arturo. He's actually been also doing random live feeds, which are so interesting just to see him work. And I really appreciate you letting us into your practice in that sort of intimate way. It really it means a lot. We have a couple things coming up this weekend. We have open studio hours, so if people want to come and meet you, say hello, check out what you're doing, follow up with you. Saturday and Sunday, 12 to 4. People can do that. We're still practicing social distancing, so we're not, packing the studio right now still, and masks are still required for sure.
No high fives.
Yeah, no high fives. Unfortunately. Let's see. I think that probably does it. I want to tell everyone to also tune into our events page for any other follow-up events that we might add that we'll be doing next week. Otherwise, our next artist in resident in May is a Boston-based artist named Andy Lee. So we'll look forward to learning about him. But in the meantime, really, really excited that you're here, Arturo, and I want to give a shout out to Helen and Kai, who have been kind enough to house you here for a couple of weeks. So thank you. And I think that'll do it for tonight. So thanks again for your time, Arturo. This has been really amazing.
Yeah, no, thank you for hosting me.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thanks everyone, and tune in again next month, and we'll see you soon. Good night.